What's
Yeah,
the
we
temperature
haven't
like
had,
there, John?
Pardon?
What's the temperature like?
88
Wow.
degrees
Ian,
Fahrenheit.
what's it down in San Antonio?
95 today. Tuesday is supposed to be 105.
Yowza.
Yeah.
But it's a dry heat.
It's still pretty humid.
Well,
Yeah. John, the inside of your oven is a dry heat too. So
Yeah.
just if you were to. So Ian, are you a native of Texas?
I am not. I am a Colorado native that transplanted here to Texas a little over 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
originally
that's right. You went to Colorado School of Mines is where you went to school, right?
Yes, I did. I got my bachelor's and master's degree there and then moved on down here.
So this is going to be a silly question, but okay, is the School of Mines just like a normal school? I mean, there's not like mining involved. You don't have like those big pickaxe things. And
We do. Yep. We have
Really?
our own mine. We have our own mountain. So they actually have classes underground in the mine.
Wow.
What do they mine in this mountain?
That's a
Knowledge.
good question. That's right, knowledge.
Punch.
I'll be here all week, John.
it's not uranium.
Fried chicken.
You're mining uranium or something like that.
Nope. I'm sure whatever they're mining is probably pretty boring. So
How
did
long have
have
you been with Southwest?
I've been with Southwest for over 5 years.
Always working on electric car stuff?
I started on the internal combustion engine side of things, doing applied research and development for higher efficiency engines, and then transitioned into electrified powertrains.
So I saw that a PowerPoint that you did a presentation about the efficiency of treaded vehicles, as in tanks. Now,
Yes.
was that for an electrified tank, or that was just looking at the behavior of a normal tank?
Yeah, no, that was a 40-ton Prius.
Oh, really?
Essentially, yeah, the customer we had wants a hybrid electric tank. So it was coming up with a design solution that met all of their automotive requirements and energy requirements, and it was fun.
Conventional combustion engine reciprocating for the that part.
Yeah, so a conventional diesel engine coupled with a heavy-duty automatic manual transmission and a number of hub motors and large motor generators.
Well, that's interesting. A hybrid with a manual transmission.
Yes, yeah, so automated manual. So
There was one sold in the U.S. You remember what it was?
I don't.
The one in the Volkswagen had?
No.
I don't know.
The Honda CRZ for a while had a manual option.
No kidding. What they sell two of them? I don't remember that.
I think that entire line of small, mild hybrid vehicles did not do what Honda had hoped it would.
Well, that CRZ wasn't very fuel efficient, as I recall, and it was costly, and so it made a question of like, why would you want one?
Yeah, well, they were hoping, I think, to get the magic from the CRX, except it weighed 700 pounds more.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily want to ride in a CRX today or drive one on the highway. I took my 91 Isuzu out to lunch, and it's small. Everything was smaller then.
A 91 Isuzu, that should be in a museum, John.
No, that's for the cars from the 40s and 50s that sit next to it in the garage. But,
You know, most people don't know it. Isuzu still is in the U.S. market, but only with trucks right now.
exactly.
They actually have a hybrid medium duty truck.
Oh, we're about to go here, guys. One sec. This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 512 for June 4th of 2020, EV Insights from the Southwest Research Institute. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Your journey, our passion.
Gary, how you doing out there?
Good, John. How are you?
I'm living in virtual land here and doing just
That's
fine.
right. Well, it's another show, so it's all good. That's
all
what
good.
I have to say.
That's right. No, this is going to be a good one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's something that I discovered today. We're going to be talking a lot about technology and technology advancement. And I was astonished to discover this. So in 1896, on this day, Henry Ford drove his first quadricycle out of his house. This was one where he had to take the axe to get out because he built it too large for the door. Okay, the thing that is astonishing is 28 years later, in 1924, the 10 millionth Model T was produced.
That's a pretty good statistic. That's right.
Just
Wow.
how quickly that happened.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, so let's move on to the technology part of the show, bringing in our guests.
Yeah, well, first we got to let everybody know we've got Ian Smith here from the Southwest Research Institute, and we've got John Voelcker, colleague of ours who reports on and covers and even consults extensively on electric vehicles. And great to have the both of you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Ian, I imagine a lot of people don't know about the Southwest Research Institute, and those who know a little bit about it, I know, and this has gone on for years, they confuse it as being one of the national labs. Give us a quick thumbnail of what SwRI is all about.
Yeah, so we are an applied research and development institute. We're a not-for-profit company that really focuses on everything from deep sea to deep space. So we have a number of different groups inside Southwest. Some focus on space technology, others focus on biopharmaceuticals. My group specifically, we focus on powertrain engineering. So whether it's passenger car, heavy duty, medium duty, diesel, gasoline, or electric.
Yeah.
So why powertrain engineering at a research institute in San Antonio, Texas?
That's a good question. So SwRI started back in the late 1940s from an oil tycoon who really wanted to focus on building an institute that focused on research and development that really benefited mankind. And so just kind of happened to take off in San Antonio, Texas. And we've been focused on automotive engineering for the past 70 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot. Well, let's start talking about some of the work. In fact, I want to kick off the whole Q&A part with you here with a question from Dave Tuttle, who is also based in Texas, a good friend of Autoline here. He wants to know what's going to be needed to make a 1,000,000-mile battery, like the ones that General Motors and Tesla are talking about. And he wants to know, what kinds of things are you guys seeing at Southwest Research Institute in terms of battery life?
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's definitely going to need to be a push towards advancements and improvements in battery cell chemistry. There's so many different chemistries out there today. There's LFP, NMC, NCA. The market is pretty wide, and we're seeing year over year improvements as far as capacity and capacity retention for all these different cells. And General Motors already announced that they're looking at an NCMA chemistry, which is supposed to have even better durability and even better performance at a lower cost because it has a little bit less rare earth materials in it. But the the testing that we do at Southwest Research Institute, we see, depending on the duty cycle and the way that you really control and maintain these batteries, they can easily last for your typical 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty with no problems.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning less rare earth materials. Okay, right now we have a very small percentage of vehicles that have batteries. I mean, well, all batteries. Electric vehicle batteries. Is there a sufficient amount of material if we get to 10%, let's say?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know there's a lot of research in that, and there's a lot of push, not just on the battery side, but also on the electric motor side to really reduce the amount of rare earth materials that are in it for a lot of different reasons. One, you don't know how much material there might be. We're finding more material every day. I know I read an article a couple months ago where they had found a massive stockpile of your cobalt just off the islands of southern Japan, but they're tens and tens of miles below the surface of the sea.
So there will be an availability, so one need not necessarily worry about running out anytime soon. What are the things that a lot of people see with regard to electric vehicles are the big conflagrations when there becomes an accident? For some reason that when a gasoline powered car goes up in flames, no one cares. But as soon as an electric vehicle goes up in flames, it's like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Okay, 2 questions. I mean, why do they burn so much? And 2, is this something peculiar to electric vehicles?
Okay, so those are good questions. I think one of the main reasons why it's always kind of in the news is it's something new, right? So electric vehicles, they've been around for the same amount of time as internal combustion engines, but now they're really starting to become more and more mainstream. And so any small little problem is a really big thing in the news because it's something new, right? Something to also remember, though, is the amount of energy that's stored in these battery packs is considerably less than the amount of energy that you would have in your gas tank, whether you drive a diesel truck or a gasoline passenger car. Now, one of the reasons why the fires are so intense is because the chemical energy that is built up inside these cells is extremely volatile once it goes into thermal runaway. And it's really difficult to put out. So once it starts, it pretty much just keeps going unless you can get that heat away from it. And so there's been tons of advancements as far as what kind of materials do you use to maybe stop a cell from going into thermal runaway or stop it from propagating to the rest of the module or rest of the pack. And those are some tests that we're doing here at Southwest Research Institute with a lot of our customers. But there's also a lot of focus on, well, how do you better design the battery pack so that it doesn't fail in the first place? Mm-hmm. There's always the talk of a solid state battery where the way the chemistry is made up of those batteries, you don't have that really volatile electrolyte that's really the main cause or purpose or way that those fires begin. And so, solid state batteries are great that they don't catch fire, but they're a little difficult to scale up to the production volumes and sizes that we need for the automotive industry.
Ian, talk a little bit more about that, because that seems to be one of the biggest hopes for driving down costs and improving safety in EVs is these solid state batteries. Toyota had talked about maybe having prototypes available this year. Mm-hmm. Where do you think the industry stands? When do you think we might see these things in production?
So I know everybody has a focus on solid state batteries. They're light, they're efficient, they don't pose the safety implications that conventional lithium ion cells have. But most of the research that's been done so far has been on really small scale, we'll call them button cell style batteries, or really small pouch cell batteries that while they're very impressive at the cell level, it's difficult to scale that up into a battery pack that has enough capacity or enough power capacity to be able to drive a full-size vehicle down the road. Now, I know my gut feel is that we'll start seeing more and more of that probably within the next 5 to 10 years. But the design cycles for these vehicles take 4+ years for a new vehicle. So we might not really see it until 2030 timeframe.
And what is it about the solid state? You mentioned that they're difficult to scale up in production.
That's actually a really good question. I'm not a cell chemist, nor am I a cell manufacturer, so I don't really have a good explanation as to why they're so difficult to scale up.
Gotcha.
So do you guys at the institute there research how different types of battery systems that are in vehicles today, how they compare to one another?
Yes, yeah. So we have a consortium called our EVs consortium, which is specifically focused around testing battery cells and electrified vehicles. So whether it's a hybrid vehicle, a plug-in hybrid, a battery electric. And the whole goal of that is to understand, well, what is the performance of these battery packs under different conditions? And it's all normalized, so that way we can easily take a cell from a Tesla Model 3 and compare it to a cell from a Nissan Leaf, for example, and say, okay, well, how did that cell compare in terms of the amount of resistance that it had, its temperature rise, its efficiency? How did it compare in terms of durability or life? So we do cycle life testing and calendar life testing to be able to understand for what random kind of duty cycle anybody might be able to come up with. We have statistical models that can predict what the actual capacity fade or power fade is going to be.
Hey, since you started your research work there on the internal combustion engine, we got a question from Graham Conway. Wants to know if you think that the internal combustion engine has a future and for how long?
Yeah, so I don't think that the internal combustion engine is going anywhere. I think there's going to be a need for internal combustion engines in the future. It's Mother Nature is pretty fantastic at coming up with oil, and oil has great energy density with it. And so if you're looking to move 40,000, 60,000, 80,000 pounds from LA to New York on a semi-tractor trailer, it's going to be pretty difficult to have a battery pack that's scaled big enough to provide you enough energy to really make it an efficient or cost-effective mode of transport. I think that we'll see there's going to be a pretty big mix as far as the number of battery electric vehicles, where they're located in the United States and globally, as well as the number of internal combustion engines and where they're going to be located both in the United States and globally.
What do you think about fuel cells? You know, next week we've got the CEO of Nikola coming on the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fuel cells they're always a hot topic. One of my staff engineers here, he's been around the industry for 30 years, and his joke about fuel cells is they're always 10 years out. I think fuel cells are fantastic at being able to provide, nice, steady power for certain applications. But the real big impediment is the cost of them. So especially when you start moving to PEM fuel cells where they have a lot of platinum in them, just the cost starts to be really, really difficult to be palatable.
Ian, to get back to the internal combustion engine question, though. So we can see this being used in Class 8 trucks to move goods across the country. But what about urban driving? Is this going to go away in terms of what people have in their driveways?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think a lot of it stems around where exactly we want to look. So if we want to look somewhere in Europe, for example, where they have really, really strict reductions in CO2 emissions, it's going to be maybe more commonplace to see a lot of battery electric vehicles, especially for those that live in very urban city center type locations. Here in Texas, everybody loves to drive, and it's a little bit more of a hard sell to be able to say, hey, here's a battery electric vehicle that only has a range of 200 miles. Even though I may only drive 20, 25 miles a day, what we've seen from a lot of the consumers is they still want that long range and the short charging time. And so that's where we come in, where we work with our customers to come up with research programs to understand, well, how can we get the range or efficiency of these vehicles higher? And how can we get the charge times lower to make it more palatable for future adoption?
So what makes things like quicker charging happen? I mean, is that all about the chemistry that you were talking about before?
So some of it is chemistry. Some of it is the way the battery pack is designed. So you can look at it from a couple of different ways. But if you look at Ohm's law, where power is just voltage times current, the real big impediment to fast charging for cells is the amount of current that goes through them. So if you can increase the voltage of the battery pack, like with the Porsche Taycan, where you have an 800-volt battery pack, you now have half the amount of current going into the battery. So you could theoretically charge it with 2 times the power and have the same amount of current going through it. So that's one end of the scale. The other end is on the thermal management side of it. So as you're charging these batteries very aggressively, their temperature can rise quite substantially, actually. And so that's where we're looking into new kind of thermal management techniques and designs where maybe we'll move away from the indirect cooling, like let's say the Tesla Model 3 or the Chevy Bolt, where they have a cold plate or a cooling ribbon that passes through the pack to cool down the cells, to more of a immersed or direct type coolant application, where we have a non-conductive fluid that's passing over these cells to take that heat away, allowing you to really be a lot more aggressive with your charging and discharging.
Hey, John, Voelcker, we got a question here from the audience that maybe you can help out on, speaking about EV charging. From Bob Wilson here, wants to know, how will EV charging continue after the Volkswagen money runs out?
Well, one of the challenges is that I am struggling to find a business model under which fast charging will ever be a profitable entity in this country. But I think my take is that if you look at the net present value of an EV on the road to an electric utility, it is substantial because they sell more kilowatt hours, ideally overnight at home, when they can, in fact, deliver you those with almost no increase in infrastructural costs. And so after a slow start, and the US is a little peculiar in that we have something like 3,600 utilities. Now, most of America gets its energy from the largest for-profit utilities, and then there are a handful of there are thousands of littler ones out there. But I tend to think that as we play out the 2020s, the utilities are the natural place to provide electric car charging. And then it becomes a question of what is the mix necessary. Once someone gets an electric car, they quickly key into the fact that for more than half of all Americans, you charge it at home overnight, just like your cell phone, and that's 80 or 90% of your miles. More difficult for people who live in multiple dwellings, but I'll take 50% of the market to start with, right? So then you have the problem that a lot of people simply will not consider an electric car unless they are aware that there is this nationwide, pervasive, easy to find, high-speed charging network that will allow them to go visit grandma or do whatever, to do these trips that are longer than 150 or 200 miles. Okay. There's actually more of it out there than people think, but they're not aware of it. The automakers have made essentially zero effort to market it or to educate on this in any sort of meaningful way, because at the moment they're losing money on every electric car they make, save for Tesla, which obviously has its own network at the moment. But I think as electric cars get closer to profitability and we start to see the auto companies take them more seriously for reasons of them being better cars, as opposed to the strict regulatory push we've seen in the first 10 years, then all of a sudden the electric utilities will become the places that a lot of the infrastructure comes from. So the answer to the question is, when the Volkswagen money runs out, and that's still 7 years or so from now, we presume by then the network that it has built will be slightly more reliable than people report it is at the moment. But I don't know that there will be independent charging networks. I also don't think that the Tesla model, where the car maker does it, is going to be one that the majority of automakers will adopt. But I do see electric utilities being really interested in this, because basically their regulators say, we want you to sell less electricity unless it's renewable. This is a place where selling more electricity is a net win for society and lowering carbon. So that's probably a thing that they think, oh, that's cool.
And why is it that you don't think that you can put a business case around fast charging?
Well, even if you're driving your 18-foot long, 3-ton, 5-passenger pickup truck with a very large diesel engine, what's it costing you these days to drive 200 miles? And then compare that to the per mile charges at some of these networks. It's not a very pretty comparison. And none of them are making money.
I.e., what you're saying is if you want to go fast charging, you're going to pay a whole lot more for the electricity.
Yes. And the problem is people are not going to sort of say, well, I pay this much at home for 80% of my miles, but when I go visit grandma, I can pay a little bit more. That's kind of not how people think, right? So, go ahead.
Does the fast charging have any negative effects on the battery life?
Ian,
Yeah, so fast charging can have a significant effect on battery life. We've done tons of research and testing on battery cells of different chemistries and different form factors. And, we did one test on I won't say what vehicle it was, but if you took it and fast charged it every single day for 6 months, it would have a 20% drop in its capacity, which is kind of the industry standard or industry norm of saying, well, that battery is at the end of its useful life for automotive applications. So there's
Could I ask Ian, was that an actively cooled or a passively cooled battery?
That was an actively cooled battery.
Okay.
There's still a lot of improvements to be made, and I know every day every major car company is working to really improve the amount of fast charging and durability of their cells. But it's just kind of a waiting game or a slow trudge there.
So, Ian, let's talk battery cost. Supposedly Tesla is going to be soon doing its battery day, talking about a bunch of things. One of the things, I think it was Reuters that reported, is they're going to be announcing $80 per kilowatt hour at the pack level, not the cell level. Where do you think costs are going, and do you think that's a realistic number?
Costs have been year over year declining. I think GM was forecasting to have $100 per kilowatt hour at the cell level, $120 per kilowatt hour at the pack level. Audi is claiming very similar numbers to that, I think around 110. The $60 per kilowatt hour seems kind of aggressive, but it's a little bit different form factor for them since they're putting 5,000 cells in every car, and then you have a few 100,000 cars. Maybe the efficiencies of scale really play to them as opposed to, GM and Audi, where they use the large form factor pouch and prismatic cells.
Mm-hmm.
Ian, do you do work on e-motors as well? And is there any development going on in that space that is going to be a game changer of any sort?
We do, yeah. So it's interesting. Electric motors have been around for as long as, batteries have been, about 100 years. And there hasn't been too much in the news recently about, outstanding or revolutionary changes, but there's still a lot of push towards making that last little bit of efficiency improvement. So looking at, variable magnetic flux or variable magnetic field motors, and the ability that gives you to maybe shift the efficiency map or the peak efficiency zones or efficiency islands of the motor and under different conditions. There's also looks at how to kind of on the fly change between a delta and a Y wound motor to maybe have under certain conditions where you need really high torque, you operate in one kind of wound setup, and then when you need really high speed, be able to just very quickly change it to the opposite kind. So we do work with our customers to look at what are the new improvements in integrated permanent magnet, AC, variable magnetic field, all those different kinds of motors, and the push towards silicon carbide technology on the inverter side as well.
John, I'd like to get your input too, going back to the cost and Tesla for a minute. You think it's realistic to get down to $80 per kilowatt hour? And do you think that's something that they'll be announcing?
Well, Tesla hasn't talked to me in 2 or 3 years, so I know what I read just like you guys. I am reminded of what I was told 15 years ago by a cynical automotive engineer. There are 3 kinds of lies: damned lies, and battery costs.
Yeah.
But that said, we know historically that for small consumer format lithium cells, the cost performance has improved about 7% a year over 30 years. I have been asking for 12 years, automotive electric car engineers, is that a reasonable number? Convince me it's too high, it's too low for automotive application. No one has said, no, that's not a reasonable number. And what I do know is that there is an investment bank, and I forget which one it is, which since 2008 has done its 4th revision to make the downward slope steeper of its battery cost declines. We have done better than 7% a year for automotive batteries over the last 10 years, if I'm reading the numbers correctly. So I have not yet heard of any physical limitations, and Ian, maybe you can speak to this better, that would sort of say, okay, we can go down to here and then it's just going to plateau. You can't wring any more cost out of a cell. They keep talking about this for microcircuits on Moore's law, and then they keep doing new things. So Ian, do you know of anything that would sort of stop battery cost reductions over 5, 10, 20 years?
The only thing that I could think of is how much cobalt that it might have in it, or if the price of cobalt starts increasing really dramatically because the amount that we're having to mine for the batteries starts increasing dramatically, maybe that might have some play as far as setting a kind of like an asymptote as far as price is concerned. But you're right. Everybody always seems to find a new way to do something and a new way to break through. So I'm with you. I don't think that there's anything stopping it from continuing to decrease.
The thing I keep in mind is when I was in high school, we got the first cars with catalytic converters, 1975, right? Apparently now, today's catalytic converter uses a couple of percent to 4% of the platinum that the old one did. And so now it's become universal. I don't know. I think I recall GM saying they were using well less than half the cobalt in their next battery chemistry that they were using in the one from the Bolt EV. I generally tend to think that the same applies to battery engineers that applies to automotive engineers. They're really good at taking complex electromechanical devices and making them smaller, cheaper, and more reliable for mass production in greater numbers. I think that applies to batteries too. But it's not Moore's law. Anybody who tells you Moore's law for battery cost improvements has no idea what they're talking about. About 7% a year, maybe better.
Yeah, we had Bob Gallion, the former CTO of CATL, on the show about a month ago or so. And, one of the things that we discussed is, you cannot get the cost of the battery below the cost of the materials needed to make it. And so one of the keys is getting costly materials out. And Ian, you were hinting at that. Get cobalt out of the battery.
Yeah, exactly. And, as John had said, GM's already announced that their next generation Ultium batteries are going to have the NCMA chemistry. So they add in a little bit of aluminum and are able to take out some cobalt to really reduce the amount of cobalt that's necessary while still having a really high performance, high capacity cell.
Ian, you said you've been at SwRI for about 7 years now. As you look back at just this period of time, are you seeing a vast increase in the amount of interest that customers have in terms of improving batteries and electric motors?
Yeah, there's a huge improvement and a huge increase in the amount of people that are interested in improving battery and motor technology. I mean, Ford has dedicated $10 billion, Volkswagen about $20 billion towards electrification technology and improvement. And, we've seen a large increase in the amount of work that we do related towards, battery pack testing and design and electrified powertrain testing and design. So,
yeah. Hey, look, we're going to have to wrap up this segment of the show and take a quick commercial break. But Ian Smith, thanks so much for coming on. Very interesting what you're all doing there at Southwest Research Institute. And I'm glad we got the chance to talk with you today.
Definitely. Thank all of you.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay, real good. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back to talk about more news in the industry and other things going on right after this. So this is the part of the show, John, you may remember, because you've been on the show before, where Dr. Data makes his appearance with a number for us to guess at what the heck it means.
So this is going to be an absolute easy one. And if one of you guys doesn't get it, I'm going to be falling out of this chair. Okay. So Katie, please bring up the quiz. All right. So the number of vehicles per 1,000 people in North America, and this is as of 2017, what was it? 850 vehicles per 1,000 people, 695, 575, 710, 450, or 630. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm going to say none of the above. I thought we had more cars than people.
All right. So
No. I'm being facetious there. But I'm going to go with the big number. I'll say 850.
850. John Voelcker, what do you think?
It's either 850 or 710, but 850 is taken, so I'm going to say 710.
Really? Okay, so we've got 850 and 710. Interesting. Katie, please bring up the answer. 695. Both of you guys were wrong, and now I fall out of the chair. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about that number is, so I started chasing down the number of vehicles per or people per vehicle in China. And the highest number that I could find is 105 vehicles per 1,000 people in China. And according to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, they're predicting that by 2050, that number will be 400 vehicles per 1,000 people. So then I started thinking about, we had the sales numbers this week, which were, here in the US. And, this whole notion of, if we look to China and see how the recovery there from COVID-19 seems to be, a good V shape. But then I was thinking, they have so few cars there and we have so many here. Is it truly going to change here? So John Voelcker, what do you think in terms of the recovery from COVID-19 in terms of the industry sales in the United States?
I want to see data through July before I say anything definitive, which is cheating. But I think from what I've seen, the bulk of the job losses and income erosion has been on the lower end of the spectrum. somewhat different than the 2008 recession. And I know that a lot of people said that even April sales down 46%, was it? Or was it 46% of the year prior, were better than people thought. My suspicion is that people still need vehicles, and those who do need vehicles are going to replace them if they have the money, because some of the people on the lower end of the income scale can't afford new vehicles anyway. And I try to level set when I talk about this stuff by saying, okay, 17 million new vehicles a year in the US, plus or minus, almost 3 times that number of used cars every year, which we really sort of never talk about. So new car sales probably will be hit, but if the people who can afford to buy new cars are hit less hard by this particular pandemic and its economic effects, it may not be as bad as we think. But we don't have really any growth in the US market. I mean, it's a replacement market. We're maxed out at 695 or whatever the number is. You know, we're not, population growth is the only thing that's going to add more vehicles.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I would actually say, Gary, I thought the May sales number was pretty good, 1.1 million vehicles. I didn't think it was going to get anywhere near that. But having said that, you know, we know that the daily rental companies, they're not buying much of anything. And that takes almost 2 million vehicles out of the market for the year. And, but like I said, 1.1 million vehicles with a good part of the country still in lockdown. It was a better number than I thought that we would see.
I keep thinking, remember, we had Jamie Butters from Automotive News on, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago? And he said he always has to caution his reporters when they're looking at these numbers and say, but this is the worst decline we have ever seen. So even, you know, these small things, let's put this in context. That's not that great.
No, it isn't. No, you're right. I mean, even in May, sales were down 30%. That's a big hit. I mean, especially on the supplier side, we're going to see a lot of companies going bankrupt. Some have already filed.
It could be worse. It could be the airline industry.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, that's for absolutely sure. So, Alex and Partners had a briefing this morning. I don't know if either of you guys saw it, and I thought that one of the interesting things was that they were talking about what the break-even point is for the OEMs. And, you know, there's always been talk. They were saying that about, 14 million, they can still do well. And they said, well, you know what, but they say that, but that's not really the case. It's that, they don't do so well. So, so the question is, John, either John, I guess, talking about, suppliers, are they going to be capable of surviving at a lower run, globally, not just here?
Go ahead, John. You want to tackle that?
I was just about to kick it over to you.
Well, look, no, they're not going to be able to survive. We're probably going to have to see, number one, bankruptcies as companies get restructured. We're going to see other companies taking restructuring moves without going into bankruptcy. But it sure looks like for a number of years now, looking forward, they're going to have to put business plans around much lower production than what they had been running just a few months ago. And remember, we just came off in the US, the 5 best years we've seen in the history of the industry, and one right after the other. We've never seen that happen before, not in the modern era. And so it's going to be doubly hard for these companies to make the adjustments, because heretofore they've been trying to break every bottleneck in their production lines. They've been trying to acquire companies that would be able to grow their business footprint. And now they've got to go in exactly the opposite direction. And it's going to be painful and slow.
Mm-hmm. So on Tuesday, Mary Barra said to investors, I believe we will come out of this with a lower price structure that is permanent. So what do you read into that?
I think at a retail level, very few people that I talk to, all three of us are the guy who gets the question, hey, I'm thinking of buying a so-and-so, what do you think, right? Virtually no one I talk to enjoys the process of buying cars. And one of the several reasons is because they know that while there may be an MSRP on the sticker, that has little relationship to what different people pay for the car. And there's very little transparency around it. More than there used to be, but not that much more. And I think given the 0% financing that we've seen strewn about for people with good credit, and this idea of, oh, look, in fact, franchise dealers can do touchless deliveries of new cars that are negotiated completely online without locking the customer in the F&I room, then in fact, I would like to think that the process of buying a car will change, and possibly there will be some move to some legally permissible under state franchise laws version of fixed pricing. Because, and to take the electric car world as one example, right now, GM is putting about $10,000 on the hood of every Bolt EV, and the residuals on that car look atrocious because, you know, it's making up for the federal income tax credit that isn't there anymore. And, you know, they don't particularly want that in general, let alone on a specific model. So there's a lot that needs to change in pricing, and I hope some of it is driven by consumer demand. But I also am duly cautious about the enormous lobbying power of the automobile dealers of the 50 states of the U.S. So I am not confident that that will happen.
So John McElroy, look, so to take the Bolt, okay, so if General Motors has to put all of this money on the hood to move those vehicles, as a long-term play, is it going to continue to build cars or trucks or crossovers or fill in the blank that it's not making immediate money on?
No, I think those days are over. I think this is part of what Mary Barra was hinting at. You know, look at the structural changes GM made well before this COVID crisis happened. And they did it during the best of times, exiting markets where they could not make money, even though they tried forever, exiting model lines where they can't make money. I think we're going to see the same thing happen. I don't know how long they'll stick with the Bolt, but probably not a whole lot longer than when they get their other EV lines out, the SUVs, the pickups, the vans, and the like, where I believe they will be able to make a profit. Those things are going to be priced over $45,000, certainly over $40,000, which I think is the rule of thumb right now, where you have to be able to make a charge for a car to be able to make a profit on it. But yeah, losing 10 grand plus on every Bolt, that's a recipe for disaster. I don't see them sticking with it.
And I think it speaks to the progress made in battery design, cell design, battery chemistry, and the rest. The question, though, of pricing on GM's future EVs is interesting, as is volume. I mean, you got me on, so you knew I was going to talk about EVs, right?
Yeah.
The question that GM has absolutely not answered, despite repeated inquiries from many people, of the million EVs a year that they're going to make by 2025, and they've said that multiple times in multiple forums, out of about 10 million a year globally, maybe a little bit less now. How many of those come to North America? Because my thought is 250,000 max, which is about 10 times what they're selling in EVs at the moment. But it is not a million, because the bulk of them will go to China because they won't be able to sell cars in China without increasing numbers of EVs. Europe is less relevant simply because they don't sell there anymore. But so let's say you have 8 to 10 models and 250,000 a year. So you're only really selling 20 or 30,000 a year of those models. And I think given that they're bigger vehicles, they're going to have much bigger battery packs. And some of them are going to be challenging to make efficient. Hummers historically have aerodynamics about like a small municipal hospital. So you know, those are going to be expensive vehicles with really big battery packs, and they'll be profitable in part because they're not trying to sell in the compact hatchback market, which is competitive. They'll be selling in the luxury truck and the luxury SUV market, which is basically what Tesla did. They started very high. It's a traditional way of doing automotive innovation, right? Bring it at the top, sell a few for big prices, and then move it down the line.
Yeah, my back of the envelope calculation is if you look at the battery plant that they're building in Lordstown, Ohio, it looks to me like it would be able to do about 350,000 battery packs a year. So that instead of 250,000, I think GM's aiming higher than that. But you're absolutely right. The great bulk of the 1 million unit that Mary Barra has talked about for EVs is going to be in China, where you have all kinds of government incentives, not just for buyers, but for manufacturers as well. It's much easier to do a business case in China or in Europe for EVs than it is in the US.
Sure. Well, sorry.
I was going to say, according to Bloomberg NEF, that China and Europe will account for 72% of all EV sales in mid-decade.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be clear. Everybody in the auto industry knows China fully has, for 15 years, intended to dominate technologies. It sees those as those of the future. It set out to and achieved the world's largest production in photovoltaic solar cells. It set out to achieve the world's largest production of lithium-ion battery cells, well on its way. Last pieces of quality, not quite there, but they will get there. And they're in early days yet, but they fully intend to own the world's largest share of production of plug-in electric vehicles. And so they have a few carrots and a whole bunch of really big sticks, and they will move their industry in that direction. And anyone else who wants to sell cars there has to do it. So I think Bloomberg NEF is entirely on target, and the US increasingly will fall behind in advanced automotive technology, especially because it does not have what China does, which is a rapidly developing, clean, efficient, accepted mass transit network between city pairs up to 300 miles. So in China, you will not necessarily drive from city to city, as Europeans don't necessarily. We don't have that in the States. We have no approximation thereof. So we're stuck with cars.
So John Voelcker, you mentioned the Hummer EV that's coming, and here's a question for you. The Cybertruck will be out, let's say, approximately the same time.
Maybe.
Will that have a dent in sales of the Hummer EV, or is the Hummer EV just such a special truck that people will buy every one that there's made available to them?
At this point, I don't think we know enough about the people who may want to buy battery electric trucks. My only data point is I spent several hours talking to to Rivian depositors, people who actually put down money with Rivian, and tell why did you do this? You're taking a chance on a company that no one's ever heard of, and so on and so on. A lot of them from Texas. And their basic take was, I like the idea of electric cars. I drive trucks. This is something that you guys see in your everyday life somewhat more than I do. You live in Michigan. I live in New York. We got trucks here. You got a lot of trucks. Not as many as Texas, but the thing about the Cybertruck is Teslas have not historically been, oh my God, look at that. The Cybertruck looks like a prop from a dystopian science fiction movie. It looks like something that would either incinerate you with a death ray or spit out a whole bunch of people in black suits who would incinerate you with death rays. There is a market for that, clearly. And I love the idea of them trying to reinvent the truck. We'll see if what comes out the door actually looks like that. But
it's going to be 3% smaller.
Good. I think there have been some questions about whether the design that we have seen would actually pass some federal motor vehicle safety standards, but we'll leave that till whenever the final version is announced, whenever it comes out the door. But I don't think the numbers of this are going to be huge. You know, the Model 3 and the Model Y are Tesla's volume plays right now. There has been talk that the Cybertruck will save them a ton of money on tooling, up to about 50,000 units. And I think 50,000 units a year of Cybertruck is not that unrealistic. And okay, maybe 30 or 40,000 Hummer EVs. These are not huge numbers in the grand scheme of the truck world.
Hey, John Voelcker, we got a question from Chris Gregson. He says, do you have any idea when we'll see the new Hummer? And he also wants to know why we haven't seen any renderings of the GM battery, the Ultium, to get an idea of what it looks like. I was at the Ultium display. They had them out there. I wasn't aware that there were not any sort of renderings, pictures, or anything like that out there.
I think they have the pictures on their media site. I mean, I'd have to go check, but no, we all saw mock-ups of the batteries. They waved the cells around. We saw the modules, several formats for different batteries, some laying down, some stacked, etc. So the information on the Ultium cell format and modules and packs are out there, at least as much as GM wants to release, but they released a fair amount. Okay. As for the Hummer EV, it was supposed to have been launched already. If I remember, what was it? Third week of May, I think, was going to be the launch event. Is that right?
You're right. It was pushed back.
They were going to show us.
They were going to show the truck. Yeah. They have said that the schedule for coming out the door of the Hamtramck plant hasn't changed, which will be, my understanding is probably Q4 of 2021. They just, and you know, 18 months ahead is a long time to tease a vehicle. I think it's probably not such a bad thing that they're going to debut the vehicle closer to the start of production.
Oh, they've teased vehicles for very long periods of time, endlessly. What was it? The SSR, wasn't that, John? Didn't we see that like for 3 or 4 years before there was an actual vehicle? And
yeah, if I remember right, Gary, they had problems with that program. And I think John's right. There's something to be said for teasing stuff, but you don't want to get too far out ahead of yourself.
Right. But see, I was thinking in certain instances, I mean, we've actually seen the tease longer than the car was in production. So, I mean, it's all right. So let's talk.
At the risk of speaking ill, I still think the Acura NSX was probably the longest single ramp up.
Yeah.
All right. So, speaking of a time period, so in last July, Volkswagen and Ford got together, and we saw Herbert Diess and Jim Hackett hugging one another and talking about their bright future together of making an investment in Ford's Ford's Argo AI, its autonomous vehicle endeavor. And so Volkswagen said that it would invest $2.6 billion in this. It'd be $1 billion in cash and then $1.6 billion by taking what had heretofore been its autonomous intelligent driving division and bringing that into Argo AI. This week, it all came together. So I ask you guys, will it make any difference? Will this advance autonomous vehicle technology in a visible way to the rest of us?
Go ahead, John.
No, I was going to. All right. Maybe, but we've all noticed that in the last 2 years or thereabouts, all of the rather grand pronouncements about self-driving cars coming 18 to 36 months from now have quietly abated because they're not. We will see probably self-driving in some very constrained use cases, be it campuses, be it low-speed delivery vehicles, be it very carefully mapped subsets of urban areas, preferably those with not very many pedestrians or cyclists. But this whole idea of what we call level 5 autonomy, get in the car, tell it where you want to go, curl up in the backseat and go to sleep, get woken up when you get there, in any weather, in any place. All the smart people have been telling, I think all of us for 10 years, that's 2030 or later. And I have not heard that change. So 96 or 7% of it is really easy and probably in the can, but that last few percentages are really incredibly difficult. And I think all the automakers have found that, and the enormous cost, naturally, just like on electric cars, they're going to have to combine. And so will Argo AI prototype, or will we see self-driving Fords or VWs quicker? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Level 5, that's 2030 and beyond. We are starting to see a whole lot of delivery vehicles, autonomous delivery vehicles, and delivery pods. I think the whole COVID thing is going to accelerate that, so you can have contactless delivery of medicine, food, or whatever it happens to be. And also, it's clear that the automakers still do see a future in this. I mean, Volkswagen, this would have been the easiest time for VW to say, you know what, Ford, we'll go to, halvesies with you on EVs, but let's forget the EVs or the AV stuff. They haven't. They've continued with that. And who was it too that just put a bunch of money into Zoox recently? So the money is still going into that. And that means that the investment community and the technologists still see a future for it. The hype that was built up was largely talked about in the media that, hey, AVs are right around the corner. The people actually working on them never said anything like that whatsoever. And yet we still do see very impressive improvements in the technology.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, it'll spend $4 billion between now and 2023 on autonomous vehicle technology. Waymo has raised $3 billion this year. I mean, there's some real cash going into this technology. And so, it seems to me that they've got to see a pot of gold somewhere that isn't way, way off into the future.
Well, remember, the pot of gold is not just in the services, the ride services that is really going to be where autonomy goes. More than in private ownership of AVs, it's going to be fleets providing services. And then there's the data that you can monetize coming out of those vehicles. That's what's got them all really excited.
Well, on the captive audience, if you have a person who doesn't have to focus on driving, some of them are going to want to shop and send money to places. Some of them are going to want to listen to music or play movies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So we heard this week that the Volkswagen diesel scandal is something that is like Rasputin. I mean, it just continues to live. They shoot bullets into it, and it just keeps coming. So the Ninth Circuit Court basically said, this may cost some real serious. I mean, talking like this Waymo money here. I mean, big money, billions of dollars to Volkswagen for the scandal. So, John Voelcker, is this ever going to end for Volkswagen?
Well, Volkswagen would certainly like it to. I think this thing will have a long tail because let's not forget, we've seen relatively few cases of one of the largest global automakers in the world deliberately and with malice aforethought deceiving a large national government and deliberately and flagrantly violating its regulations for hundreds of thousands of vehicles. There are a number of cases of automakers that have been found at fault and penalized for various things. The Volkswagen one, I think, is of a different order. And they put aside 30 billion euros, which was almost $35 billion, maybe 3 years ago. They will probably have to put aside some more money. And no, I think it will have a tail. People have forgotten about it. Are there still fields of diesel Volkswagens slowly being polished up and resold by dealers? Because they bought back a lot of them in those pictures a year or 2 years ago of, entire fields of Volkswagens were kind of sad. But, VW doesn't want to talk about it, but the corporate liability will endure. And the U.S. court system is different from everybody else's. Mm-hmm. I thought you were going to talk about the fact that a German court had said that actually a buyer had been deceived, which to me was a much more significant legal issue because the German courts are not about corporate liability to individual buyers. They just don't do that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I would agree. All the fines that Volkswagen has paid out right now, certainly in the US, has mainly been to government agencies. Now we're starting to see retail customers, either individually or through class action lawsuits, going after the company. And that's what we're seeing moving forward now. And we just know that's going to take a number of years just in the US. And then to John's point, Germany, other countries too, where the wheels of justice grind even slower. This thing's not going away anytime soon.
Mhm.
although the U.S. customers that you're speaking of, John, are the ones who did not sign the agreement to get their cars bought back. The majority of VW diesel owners did, in fact, say, sure, give me above market for my car, take it back. I've had very low cost ownership for 1 to 5 years. Great. And part of what they signed was, I'm not going to sue you. I accept the terms, and that's that. So it's a small number, but the dollar figures for those small number of people who didn't sign could be considerably higher.
Yeah.
So,
Gary,
so we
got
saw
anything
something-
else there?
Well, so we saw something that was in some ways surprising, in many ways touching, as the George Floyd situation unraveled or developed across the United States, that Mary Barra and Bill Ford got out and expressed what their companies will be doing to help this certain case of disparity between the races. So, John McElroy, what was your impression of that? I mean, this was really astonishing to me.
Yeah,
In a
I've
good
never
way.
seen
In a good way.
In a good way, absolutely right. I totally agree. I was very pleased to see GM, Ford, and FCA, Mike Manley too. A number of suppliers came out speaking out against this. I've never, ever, that I can remember in my career, seen corporations come out and take a stance, so strong and public a stance on an issue like this, a political issue, really. And it just shows how much this crime has affected the entire country, that these companies feel that they've got to take a stand on it, not just put out some sort of statement, but Mary Barra especially was talking about how things have got to change.
Right. John Voelcker, you got any insights into this?
I don't think I have a lot more to add to that. The proof is not in the statements or the photo op or the well-meaning ads that are flooding televisions. The proof is in the actions that the companies take and the actions they lean on their lobbyists at state and federal levels to change policies that are actually the ones that contribute to this issue. And when we start to see that, and when GM doesn't just say good things with counterparts, but in fact directs its highly paid lobbyists to lobby for changes to police oversight procedures and things like, for instance, no investigations of police shootings by the DAs who work with the police departments, which is a New York State incentive that is now in process, then I will believe that they are actually doing something different. But statements are a start, but words don't cost a whole lot. Let's see what the companies do to put their considerable muscle behind enduring systemic changes.
Well put.
Mm-hmm. So that's all I got.
Well, this is good enough. Actually, this is a good way to end it up on. A good topic to bring this show to a close. John Voelcker, thanks so much for coming on again. Really good to have you. Great getting your insight.
Great fun to be with you guys.
Well, that's the beauty of this online connection that we're able to do right now. It's otherwise, we'd have to be traveling to some place where you are, or you'd have to be here physically, or at least that's the way we used to do it. This technology sure makes it easier to bring you right in right now.
Yeah, and my apologies for the camera problems, but at least you're not seeing my ceiling anymore.
That's really good. Well, thanks again, John. And Gary,
I appreciate
I'll see you
it.
again next week for sure.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Your journey, our passion.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.